Good morning. I'm Dr. Tom Rivera, and it's September the 18th, 2014, and it's approximately 9:30 this morning. And with us this morning, we have the Dean of the Fowle Library, Mr. Cesar Caballero. Cesar, welcome,
Thank you.
and thank you very much for being with us. And our guests today are Mr. Fernando Rodriguez. Fernando, welcome to our interview this morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you here. And also, we're delighted to have Sammy Hernandez.
Thank you.
Sammy is Fernando's cousin, and they were gracious enough to be with us this morning after I called Fernando and said, Fernando, would you do us a big favor and interview with us, because we'd like to talk about the businesses in Colton. And your grandfather was one of the few people that had a business in Colton, and he started the grocery store in the early 1900s. Could we talk about, can you tell us about your grandfather?
Sure.
When did he come, where was he from, where did he come to Colton?
He was from Aguascalientes,
¿Y
Mexico.
¿Cómo se llama? I'm sorry. ¿Cómo se?
Vitor Rodriguez. I don't think he had a middle name.
Okay.
It's Vitor Rodriguez. He came here prior to the turn of the century, and he married my grandmother, Manuela Ramirez.
Uh-huh.
And about 3 years later, after they were married, they had enough money to buy a piece of property, and that's where they decided to build a store.
And where was he born, in Mexico?
Aguascalientes.
Aguascalientes?
Yes.
And what year, do you remember, or do you know?
Oh, no, I don't.
No?
No, I don't. He came here, he was 11 years old.
Ah, okay.
Him and his uncle.
And what year was that?
I don't know the exact year, but
He
it was,
born in 1896.
1896?
No, 1886.
1886.
that's correct.
1886.
That's
okay.
correct, because I visited the tombstone. That is
Yeah.
correct, yeah.
So he came here in the late 1800s, 1890s?
Yes.
1897.
1890s.
Yeah, he was 11.
Uh-huh. And then why did he come to Colton?
Actually, he and his uncle first came to Highland, California, where they settled with some family, the Ramos family. And then later on, he got a job at the Colton Portland cement plant. So he moved over closer to the job, and I guess that's when he met my grandmother.
So he had moved to Colton, worked for the cement plant,
He worked there for 45 years.
and he met your mom, your grandmother.
My grandmother, yes.
And while he was working at the Portland cement plant, he got the idea of starting the grocery store?
I think that idea had been in his head. It had been a dream of his way before the Colton Portland cement plant.
Huh.
I think that's one of the reasons why he migrated here in the first place.
Uh-huh.
He had those visions, and like many people do, and it became a reality because of his persistence.
Well, you said he bought a piece of property.
Yeah.
Is that where he built this store?
That's exactly where he built the store, right on the corner of 6th and O Street, adjacent to the Santa Fe Railroad tracks.
Did he start from the foundation on up and put up the walls?
He
and
built
everything?
it block by block,
See?
by hand with the familia, because the familia was all
Right.
centrally located right
Uh-huh.
there. You know, like Sammy mentioned earlier, my great-grandmother had 10 kids, and they had their children, so there was abundant family, abundant help right there. Like it was in the old days, the familia was so close that whenever anybody wanted to do something, the family pitched in.
Uh-huh.
So that's how the store got started. And,
His grandfather never went to school. He could build anything.
oh yeah.
Oh,
There's nothing he couldn't do. Carpentry, plumbing, electrical. He did it all. Everything.
Self-taught.
I don't know how he did it. No schooling, but he was just one of these. Every place he ever built had a basement, and he dug it by hand.
Really? Wow. Amazing.
After the store got going, and actually this became later when the Enciso family came into the picture, and then my tia Juanita and my tío Cuco Rochin were involved in the store also. He started to build like little apartments on the property. Again, he built everything from scratch, and he started to get tenants there and on the different rental units, and eventually finished off the house where he and my grandma lived at the very back of the property. So he was he was a very sharp guy, very business minded, and he just kept helping people. People needed things, and That's what he did. He helped people.
Mm-hmm.
That was his main
How
concern.
did he help them, Fernando?
Well, you know, when people were migrating to in pursuit of their dreams, the railroad tracks became the highway, if you will.
Okay.
And they would come on the railroad cars. The train would stop there before it went into the yard in San Bernardino. So they would get off the cars. My grandfather saw them, and he related to their journey. And so he would feed them. He would talk to them. He would put them to work and feed them, give them a little bit of money if they needed money. He was always helping them. And it became a fact to those people that were on that journey that there was a place. That place became La Esperanza Market.
Ah.
Yeah.
Is this where the name Esperanza comes from?
No, actually the name Esperanza, that was the very first name of the store, but as it turns out, it relates because it means hope, and that's exactly what they did for God, I would say thousands of people over the years that stopped there for a little sandwich or a glass of water or
And they're coming from different places?
different places. I say most of them, the ones I saw were, I'm going to say Latinos because all I heard was Spanish. I was a little kid, but all the conversations were in Spanish, so I'm just saying they were Mexicans just like us, in search of their dreams as well.
Yeah.
When it-
Fernando, I'm sorry, go ahead,
When his
Sam.
grandfather married his grandmother, he was already a settled man. He had built his own house, had a job. In other words, he wasn't 20 years old.
Right.
He was already focused on what he wanted. He was 26 years old. He was 11 years older than my grandmother. I mean, his grandmother. But he was settled. He had a job. He had a house. What else could you do?
Yeah.
He had a job.
Yeah.
Very
You
good.
mentioned, Sammy, that he had a job. Now, who ran the store, Fernando?
Well, during the day, my grandmother would run the store and take care of the kids simultaneously. And then when my grandfather came home from work, he would run the store in the evening, and my grandmother would go in the back. She'd make dinner for the kids and do the things that the families do. And then when the kids got older, it got a little bit tougher for my grandmother to take care of the kids, because now the kids aren't, they're all over the place. And it was harder to run the store. And at the same time, the depression was showing its face. And it made it difficult for them to run the business. My grandfather didn't want to leave the security of the cement plant because that was a job. He had
regular
a
pay?
job, regular paycheck. So they had a decision to make, and that's where the Enciso family comes in.
Mm-hmm.
They made a deal, and they ran the store. I think they leased the store to them for a couple of years, and they until they left there. I forget what year it was. And they stayed for a couple of years, and after that, my tia Juanita came in, and my tío Rochin, Refugio Rochin, and they ran the store, I think, until 1938. And 1938, they left to go to Oceanside, California, to open their own market. And at that time, that's where Esteban and Mariana come into the picture. And-
Going back to your grandpa and his family, how many kids did he have?
Okay, first of all, there was Juanita. She was nicknamed La Reina because she was the queen, not only at the house there, but also many of the fiestas they had in the barrio. She was an entertainer in the community, so everyone knew her, and everyone knew her as La Reina. After La Reina was, let me go back a little bit. She had 5 kids, okay, and then there was Manuel, Mateo Meño. He later on, when he grew older, he would make deliveries also, go to LA, pick up merchandise, not only for my grandfather and Rochin and Juanita, but also for my tío Steve. He started a business in the produce, and eventually, when he got older, he came back to Colton, settled, and he opened up R&O Mexican Food Products right there on La Cadena, right close to the original property. After him and he had 8 children. After him was my dad, Victor, Victor married my mom, Carmen. There was 4 of us. Then there was Antonio. Antonio died at a very young age. He was 8 years old. And the last one was Antonieta.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is RNO still functional?
No, my uncle passed away. When he passed away, so did the R&O
Yeah. Okay.
business.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Juanita. Her son wrote a wonderful story about her.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful story that he wrote about
Ismael?
her. Yeah, and then you mentioned that she was known as La Princesa. And she could sing and dance and entertain people at the Fiestas Patrias. And she took music lessons from Mrs. Margarita Gomez.
Yes, she
Mhm.
did.
She took lessons from Mrs. Margarita
Yeah.
Gomez. And we have one of her family members, one of her grandsons here, Henry Vasquez. And I think Margarita was one of the people that was a cornerstone for many of the people that took music in Colton.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
She gave lessons in her house.
Uh-huh.
She must have given so many lessons because the teclas were all worn out, the ivory was worn off.
Yeah, and then she also did a lot of work for the Catholic Church.
And then the older boy played, what was his name, Tony? He played trumpet.
Tony,
Oh, really?
Tony played trumpet,
Oh.
yeah.
Played trumpet.
They were all
Musical
musicians.
family.
The family was
Yeah.
all, they were all
Very, very
musicians.
musically inclined.
Yeah.
You know, after my Tio Rochin and Juanita opened the market, they also opened a restaurant. It was called the Acapulco Restaurant. It was right on Pacific Coast Highway in Oceanside.
Yeah.
And that became a very popular place. She would play the piano during the dinner set and sing and just entertain the
Well,
people
getting
during
back
dinner.
to the early years when she was maybe 15 or 16, she went to Redlands, and there was this young man, Refugio Rochin,
Yeah.
that saw her, and lo and behold, se enamoraron.
Oh, yeah.
And then they couldn't stay away from each other, so she eloped. How did she tell? Sammy, go ahead and continue your story about Juanita.
My mother told me that she matured very young. When she was 12, 13 years old, she was already a grown woman. The other girls stayed like little girls, but she was very light complected and very beautiful. And being the first grandson, her father doted on her. Very dressed very nice. He had a job. And when they eloped, they wound up in where did they go? Mexicali or something.
Mexicali.
Yeah.
But tell us how she eloped that night.
Yeah.
Fernando, you mentioned that she pretended.
I don't know the story of when she eloped. I just know that they were in was it Brawley?
Brawley.
They had a store in Brawley that my Tio Refugio Rochin started, and that's where they stayed. They didn't dare come home because my grandfather was not not too happy at all with Refugio's moves. So eventually he talked Refugio and Rochin. This is when the transition took place from the Enciso family to the Rochin family at the market. But he talked them into coming home that everything was taken care of, everything would be fine and dandy, don't
He
worry
lied.
about a thing. Yeah, he lied, because when he came home, he had him arrested. So Refugio Rochin spent a little time in jail, and then my grandmother got the better edge of that argument there, so he came home to roost.
Yeah.
And everything was forgiven.
Yeah, that was, and we have a copy of that story with our collection of things that we're doing for this project.
Yeah.
But that was a wonderful little story. It's a great
Yeah.
story.
It
I
was.
was going to ask you, también, in running the store, did he give credit to his customers?
That's all it was, a credit store.
Tell us about that, Sammy.
Well, everybody bought for the day. Nobody had an icebox. They bought whatever they're gonna eat that day, they bought it that day because no refrigeration. So my dad started people he knew. And the people in those days, when they got married, they had family, they didn't move away. They moved down the street or across the alley. Nobody could go anywhere. And we had people trading at that store, family from family. What were they gonna do? They couldn't go anywhere. Nobody had a car. So you're pretty locked into the neighborhood.
Mhm.
You walked everywhere. There was no bus. There was no bus service in our part of town. The only bus service was on the other side of town. So when you went somewhere, you walked. So everything was in walking distance. You walked to the cement plant. You walked to the PFE. And if you worked at Santa Fe, you walked downtown, got the trolley, and went to work. There was no transportation.
Mhm.
Bicycle or walk.
Or if you picked oranges,
Yeah.
they would
You
pick you
know,
up at the corner.
People think that picking oranges is a menial job. But it's like any other thing. There was a gentleman in our hometown called Teofilo Hernandez. And he was probably the best orange picker. And he picked the two. See, oranges are not pulled off the tree. They have to be cut. They have to be trimmed because otherwise the stem, you pull the stem out, it'll rot from there. And you've got too much stem, it'll pick the next orange. He was a guy that they call him a cienero. He could, before the day was over, he already had 100 boxes, but the rest of the guys had 20. He was that good.
What was his name?
Teofilo.
Teofilo
He was related to his
Hernandez.
grandfather.
Hernandez.
He was related, he was a distant relation to his grandfather.
Okay.
They came at the same time, but he was great with it, You know, the average guy goes on a ladder, he holds on with one hand. Not him. He had terrific balance and everything. And the ladder you use for picking oranges are not that heavy because you hurt the tree, but he could. Le decían el cienero.
El Cienero.
Yeah.
And Sammy, your mom and dad took over the store. When did they take over the store?
In 1938.
1938?
My mother and father both worked for the Naciano Martinez that had a bakery. They both
Okay.
worked for him. My mother worked for them, and the girls used to take care of me. We lived on the same street. So when my dad opened his store, my dad and my mother ran it, and I used to go stay with my grandmother across the street.
Now, across the street is what street, Sammy?
O Street.
O Street,
O
okay.
Street. Right there, I'd stay with my grandmother, and sister. And then when they get late at night, they didn't close the store till after dark. I wouldn't go home. I'd stay with my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
But
The Martinez market was also family run. Lupe Martinez was, that was my tia. And she was one of Bernardina's daughters, was my grandma's sister. So she married Don Luciano, and they opened a store of their own, and everybody worked for
yeah,
Don
one of her
Luciano at
sons
one
was
time or
Nick
another.
Martinez, a musician.
Oh, the
in town.
musician, okay.
That was a son, Nick.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Nick. Albert was a musician also, but he didn't pursue it like Nick did.
Mhm.
Nick went into songwriting and he'd do arrangements. There's not a club in the valley that he didn't play.
And he
at.
played during the 30s and 40s?
When he was in high school, they already had a band when they were in high school.
Mhm.
Nick and Albert were born in the same calendar year. They weren't twins, but they were born in 1920, both of them. So they grew up together.
And the Martinez Bakery was on the corner of 7th and
In
M
7th
Street?
and M Street,
And
correct.
M Street,
Mhm.
the northwest corner?
Yeah.
Okay. And you were all related?
Yeah, we're all related. So it's pretty common for us to get out of church on Sunday with Padre Valencia and then go get some pan dulce at the bakery. And then we'd go to my Tio Steve or to La Esperanza Market. On Sundays, it was more of a social event there. Very little shopping was done. There was more yakking and, La Tijera, I guess you could say. And everybody talking about one another. And everybody knew each other in the store, which made it unique. And I think that's what made the store special. You mentioned credit, or you asked a question about credit. My Tio Steve, I think, started that. And he understood how difficult it was for young families to put food on the table, pay the bills, and just do the basic necessities of life. And so he extended credit, I think, to everybody that came into the store. I don't remember ever hearing any discussion about issues about somebody not paying or having to go knock on somebody's door to collect the debt. I think people just respected the fact that my Tio Steve and my Aunt Mariana were able to do that for them, and really it was a blessing to the whole neighborhood that was made available to them.
Now, Mariana is your mom, and she
It's my
was
tia.
your tia.
She was his grandmother's sister.
Yeah. Okay.
My grandmother was the oldest, and my Mariana was the youngest girl. She would be the ninth in line there was 10 kids, and my Theo Pete was the youngest one.
Oh, okay, okay. And Sammy, running the store, we talked about credit. What about, what made the store, you know, a popular store where people would go there?
My
on a-
dad,
Yeah.
Tell me about your dad.
my father, he
Yeah.
just,
Steve, Esteban.
I never heard say anything bad about anybody. He's just a people person. Like I say, he never went to school. He could figure out mathematical problems. I don't know how he did it. He'd make numbers here, make a number in the corner. And I said, how'd you do it? I don't know, but that's the answer. Just could.
Mhm.
He could. And then business-wise, he was very smart business-wise. He could figure out things in his head. My uncle that owned the bakery, Don Asiano, remember in the old days you had the adding machine when you went
Right, right.
he could add up a column of numbers before you could punch them in.
Mm,
And he never went to school,
mm,
but he was that good.
mhm.
You know the old one. No.
Well, your father, Esteban, made the best sangre.
Yeah, well,
Oh,
longaniza,
delicious.
what he called it.
What do you call it?
Longaniza.
Longaniza.
Yeah.
It was the best sangre.
Yes.
It was great. I used to go there to get my pound of sangria or sangre. But what other products made him famous for that he's provided for customers?
Well, it's all what you put in it, and he never would tell anybody what he put in it. That was his, you know. He ordered the chili from some guy, it came from New Mexico. Couldn't get it here. He tried all kinds until he found something he liked. And he used garlic, but he wouldn't buy garlic. I mean, he'd buy garlic, but he had one of the hired help peel the garlic. She hated to do it, because she, but it had to be fresh garlic. He didn't use the powder, and just the way he made it.
What about the other product, the meat products? The
Well,
bologna también.
The bologna, well, in those days, I remember going to the packing house. There was a packing house on close where the Orange Show is, Smith's Packing House, and we'd go there. I was little. We'd go there and we'd go in the packing house and we'd look at them. See, when cattle is slaughtered, they put jackets on them. It's a canvas jacket they put on them, put them in the cooler, and that's why they all look alike. But what they're going to be sold, they bring them out, and the grader comes in and grades them. So they're all hanging there, hundreds of them. And we go in there. My dad said, "I'll take that one." And they'd go look and take that one. So he would pick them. He would pick which ones he wanted. So they'd cut it in half and load on the truck. We'd take it to the store.
Mhm.
We'd buy the pig, a whole pig. It'd be cut in half right down the middle. Throw them in the truck.
Uh-huh.
That's the way it was.
And you mentioned that your dad sold the ice also. Tell us about the sign that he had in the front store, in front of the window. How much ice?
No, that was the Iceman.
Oh, tell us about the Iceman then.
Well, they had a sign that said ice on it. It was square. And at the very top, it had 25, 50, 75, 100. So however you turned it and hung it in your window, the Iceman knew how much ice he wanted. So he wouldn't have to make two trips. He'd bring the ice, put it in your wooden ice box that they had there, and then you had ice
Oh, this was for the customers.
for the
For
customers.
the customers.
See, the Iceman came once a day.
Uh-huh.
Every day he came. And then my aunt bought the first gas Cervelle in the whole neighborhood.
The first what?
Cervelle, remember
The
Cervelle?
refrigerator.
Ice boxes, they were gas operated. It was you remember Cervelle ice box? She had the only one in the neighborhood. Ice box. We used to run over there and she'd make us Kool-Aid in ice cubes and give them to us.
Uh-huh.
But nobody had an ice.
Yeah, one of the selling points of the Cervelle Icebox is that there were no moving parts, so that was a big selling point. You know, I'd like to mention something also about the product at the market. There's some products that sometimes can't be bought and sold, and that's what La Esperanza was famous for. You can't, I get emotional, even thinking about it. You can't sell love, can't sell respect, can't buy it,
It was.
but it was there. And that's what made this place, you know,
Like I was
excuse
telling
me,
you.
what it was.
Yeah.
A
Like,
lot
I-
of it there.
like I was telling you before, that we lived, there was a door between the store and where we lived. And my dad would close the store 8, 9 o'clock, and we'd be sitting in the kitchen eating, and bang, 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 they bang on the back door. No tenemos leche. Oh, okay, my dad will open the store. And they, oh, no tenemos lunch meat. So my dad, because like I say, they couldn't keep anything overnight. No, the houses didn't have no air conditioning, no refrigerator,
It
nothing.
was almost a 24/7 operation.
Well, yeah, they beat on the door in the back. They knew where we lived.
Uh-huh.
We need ice, we need milk.
You know, the other thing that they were famous for, I think, is my Tio Steve would have a nickname for everybody that came to the store. He was famous for, he even had his own nickname. It was El Pelon. I mentioned it in the story. And he was proud of that. But one story that I remember the most was Mr. Shockley. The Shockley family lived in Colton also. They had a ranch there right across the 3rd Street where the cement plant is now. And Mr. Shockley had a hunchback, so he was, doubled over most of the time looking at the ground wherever he walked. So my Tio Steve called him El Maromero because it looked like he was always going to throw maroma when he came around, so ahí viene el Maromero. But that was a term of endearment. He wasn't making fun of him. It was a term of endearment. But that's the kind of names that my Tio Steve would apply to most of the people that came into the store. Some of them I can't even repeat, but everybody had a name.
Everybody had a surname. Also, Fernando, in your pictures that you have the store, the front part of the store, there's a picture there of, you mentioned that your dad would provide home service.
Oh,
and-
yeah.
And take,
Yeah, we close the store and we do deliveries.
tell us about some of the deliveries that you did. You mentioned that you went to houses that at that time, this was the late 30s, that did not have,
Floors.
they had dirt floors.
There was a family called Perez, Jeremias Perez, remember him?
The boxer.
Well, he lived right there on the corner of Congress, and it was a 2-story house. And I was about in high school then, and they buy flour 100 pounds, and it was a 2-story house. I had to go up these stairs. I hated to carry the flour up. We call it a periquera. In fact, they had a parrot, but that's where they lived, right next to the Colungas.
Oh, yes, okay. I
Right there
remember that
in the
place, yeah.
esquina. That was where Chayo, he had a gas station, and Jeremias, and then the 2 boys went to school with me, Boxley and Sammy. They were there. But Jeremias went to school with my mother. He was the same age as my mother. But they had a big 2-story house. Right then, I had to carry a sack of flour up the stairs.
And then some of the other houses that you made deliveries to.
They had a lot of houses that had no hot water, had water, but no hot water. They didn't have sewers. They had a toilet in the alley, and the water from the sink would drain out into the yard, for the plants. They didn't have anything else. It was it.
It's a poor neighborhood then.
His grandfather built 2 community toilets. One had a toilet and one had a shower and a toilet. And it was there for everybody. It was free water, hot water. On Saturdays and Sundays, there were people we didn't even know bringing their kids to give them a shower.
And where was this located,
Right
Sam?
there by
Behind the
house,
store.
behind the store.
Yeah, right adjacent
And
to
he
my
had put an
grandmother
old
and
water
grandfather's
heater on the
house.
side, and you had to build a fire under it to heat the water. And people we didn't know, everybody was welcome, come in.
It was a community shower then.
Yes, it was.
It was the first one, I think it was the first indoor plumbing in South Colton. Nobody had anything like that. And I remember as a kid walking into the shower, and I was amazed that it was inside, and you had walls, and, and then the overhead shower, you could stand
And
under it
hot
and
water, all you wanted.
Yeah.
You never ran out. And like I said, there was people that we didn't know, they'd bring their kids in, shower them down. And then it was a toilet on the side, because, let's face it, it was a different life. It was different. Yeah, Cuates Abriles, you probably heard of
The
them?
baseball players.
Okay, they lived across the tracks, and I used to go there, we'd play ball
Across the tracks,
on Walnut Street,
Okay.
Maple Street.
Maple Street, okay.
Well, one of the things we had to do every so often was move the outside toilet, because they didn't have any inside plumbing. So we'd do,
So you had to move the johns
we'd
and
have to dig
bury
a
it
new hole.
and then.
That's it,
Okay.
we'd dig a new one, and it was like a little tool shed. We'd move the tool shed, put it over the new hole, and go get dirt and fill in the old hole.
Okay,
That was one
that's
of the
what we,
things.
yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
she said.
So the infrastructure in South Colton was not there. You
Well,
know, the
like my
sewer-
mother says, there was gas and electricity, but the people did not have the money to bring it in.
Mhm.
We didn't get a telephone till I was in high school. We had a phone in the store, but we didn't have a phone in the store
Mhm.
because it wasn't there.
Mhm.
And,
And tell me, when did the old store burn down?
It was 1976 when it burned down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a pretty sad day. I remember the phone call vividly. It was pretty sad, you know, people, you know, family crying and
Yeah.
people rushing down. There's nothing you could do. I mean, the store is already burnt down, and it was just, all that history got wiped out in just a very short period of time. But my dear Steve, he wasn't buying any part of that. He didn't take him long to I guess, get with the Navarro family 1 block away, because the Navarro store was sitting there idle. So
On the corner of 7th and O.
7th and O Street,
Okay.
1 block down.
Uh-huh.
So my dear Steve moved there, and they opened the store again. They were closed on Sundays, and they were only open half day on Saturdays. But still, the same community. They just went a block over, and business continued. It was a successful business even at that location for years, until my dear Steve retired in 1989. And I think everybody that's still around remembers that time.
Mhm.
Pretty sad,
Mhm.
because the store went idle. It's just like a car breaking down, and it's just parked there, and nothing's going on with it. But everybody knows what happened, that car, when it was a brand new Chevy or whatever it was, you know, all the things, all the fun, the stories. Well, it was kind of like that. You know, I still have those stories about just going to visit my dear Steve, and of course, he's always offering me something to eat, and I don't look like I'm hungry, but they always offered, Mary Matthew Steve always wanted to make me a sandwich or soda or something. You know, they were that gracious
You know,
all the
going
time.
back to the old store, when your grandfather ran the store, and also when your dad ran the store, were they part of the Chamber of Commerce or any of those?
My dad was not political. They were after him many times for the city council, because there was a bunch of guys like, you remember Jesus Llamas?
Yes,
He was very political.
yes.
The councilman,
He was also a business guy,
yeah, Pete Lukey was a councilman.
right?
And there's a lot of guys that were into that. My dad didn't want no part of it.
Mhm.
He just wasn't that way.
What about Las Fiestas Patrias?
He was for that. He was for that. You know, going back in the toilets, I'm gonna tell you something that I told him. His father is 8 years older than me. There was one day, I don't know how it happened, but I was in the backyard and I had a tomato. A tomato in my hand. His father came out of the house with a white shirt, and I threw it at him and I hit him. He caught me, took me in the toilet, and stuck my head in the toilet. He picked me up and stuck me in the toilet and then turned me loose. I never forget that day.
Did it teach you a lesson?
Well, I didn't know what he was gonna do, you know. He got me, I said, oh, he's gonna hit me. No, he just grabbed me and dunked me in the head in the toilet and then turned me loose.
Yeah, I don't think my grandfather was involved in the Chamber of Commerce or anything like that either. He believed in family, and that was the organization that he was associated with.
Yeah. Was the Chamber of Commerce in Colton open to anybody from South Colton?
I don't
I
know.
don't know either.
that.
I don't know.
No.
What about Las Fiestas Patrias? You said that
Oh,
they
that
were
was-
They
active.
participated in
a
anything in the
South
community.
That was
Yeah,
a
they were
community
involved.
effort.
Mm-hmm.
That was a community.
Did they sponsor the Queens or the?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, because Juanita was
Oh,
always
that's right.
involved,
Juanita,
and
yeah.
my Antonieta, and also from the Martinez family, there
Now,
was
who's
Celia,
Antonieta?
Carmelita,
Who's Antonieta?
Kelly, or Hernandez.
Okay.
She was the
Tell us
youngest
about
daughter.
her. Yeah.
Okay, Antonieta Kelly, or Antonieta Hernandez, was born to my tia Amelia, and it was Amelia Hernandez. Back in those days, Amelia and her husband, that's when they would go just follow the pisca, whatever, peaches, cotton, oranges, whatever it was, that's how they lived. And she was the third daughter born, and they were gonna go on another trip, and she was pretty sick. And my Uncle Manuel, he was Antonieta's Nino. He argued with my tia and said, no, I'm the godfather and I'm not going to let you take her because she's not feeling well. And so when you come back, then you can come and get her. Well, that trip turned into a year and a half. And by the time she came back, Antonieta was maybe 2 years old. She didn't want to go back. She cried all the time. So my grandfather says, you know what? She's going to stay with us.
I
So
could never figure out.
she became
why
the baby sister.
I could never figure out her brother was a Rodriguez, she was a Hernandez. It was her name, she kept her name Hernandez.
Yeah.
And I could never figure out, I said, how come Vic's a Rodriguez and Doneta's a Hernandez? They said, well, they're not really brothers and sisters, but I thought they were brothers and sisters.
But to my tia Juanita and my tio Manuel and my dad, that was their sister. And my grandfather, I mean, he treated her like that was, like my tia Juanita. Boy, he treated my Aunt Tony like a queen too. You talked about the fiestas and being involved with the fiestas. Well, the Martinez Bakery was also involved because Carmelita Martinez, she was a queen many times as well, Celia. And God, the kids were always involved. I mean, our family was always involved. And I remember, I don't know how many Easter Sundays we'd go to the church after Mass, and Father Valencia would hang judas there. And I just remember, it looked to me like the whole place was family to me. I know it wasn't, but there were so many of us, and those were just great times. Anything that happened in that community, the La Esperanza, the Martinez Bakery, and the family, we were part of it. The fiestas, I think Frank mentioned about when did they start doing the fiestas at the patio, I think. And I mean, we were involved in that too, I mean, in some way or another. So, yeah, great times growing up there.
Antonieta was very unusual for a Mexican because she was very smart and she was very, not aggressive, but in other words, if somebody said no, I'm not gonna do what I wanna do. She took classes in school that weren't open to everybody, had to be selected. Like she took journalism, which she got in journalism. She took public speaking. And Mexican people don't like public speaking, but she did. Okay, she had all her credit in her senior year. Well, the rule is you have to be in school all day. You can't go home because they give her a job in the attendance office. 50 years later, she retired from the school district.
Yeah, she was the secretary of the superintendent
That's
for
right.
many years.
She put
Yeah.
all her work in the school district, and she started when she was a senior in school, in the attendance office. She could have been anything she wanted. She was smart. She was really sharp woman. But the way things were at the time, what happened to Tony was she was so dedicated to his grandmother
Yeah.
that she didn't want to leave her. She didn't want to leave her. My mother and father offered to sponsor her to college, to go to college. She says, I'd like to, but I can't leave my mother. She couldn't.
Tight family, very, very tight.
She was so
excited.
grateful for the life she had given her, she says, I can't do it.
Let me ask you about entertainment in the barrio, Sammy.
Dances.
When you were growing up and you were a teenager.
The dances,
and,
it was the weekend dance.
tell me about those dances.
There was a family called, I forget, Juan Rios,
Yeah.
played violin.
Yes.
And he had a thing that at the end of the dance, he would play a solo for his wife. His wife would be sitting like this lady, and he would go in front of her and play just for her. And all the women, how touching, and play for her only, That's the way it was.
Yeah.
That's the way it was.
So the dances, what year was this, Sammy? In the 40s?
But mother and father running the store, they couldn't stay real late because when the people went to the dance, se madrugaba. My mother and father said, we can't stay, we gotta work in the morning. So they go to dances, which was about the only entertainment they had. My mother said when she was young, that was the only entertainment there was.
The dancing,
That was it. That was it.
And where were the dances held?
El Salon, there was a salon on the corner of, on L Street, the corner of L and 7th, it's gone now. It was a two-story place with a salon, and there was one where the valley ballroom is.
Yes.
It was another salon called a Pickering, I believe it was. It was a lagoon, there was a lake. At one time, there was a lake there with little canoes, but they said that,
Where Inland Center is now.
yeah.
Yes.
See, all that was underwater during the flood of 37.
Uh-huh.
It flooded everything.
Uh-huh.
It washed it away.
Uh-huh.
But that, my dad says that was it. Everybody looked over for the weekend because nobody worked and had someplace to go.
What about you, when you were in high school? Were you at Colton High School?
I went to Colton High School.
What year were those?
Well, here's the thing. My mother and father didn't send me to the local school. They bused me across town to Grant School. You know
Uh-huh.
where Grant School was?
Yes,
Well, at Grant School, there was David Gasca, Ruben Aguilera, his sister, Robert de la Rosa, me. There was only Ramos, there was only about 10 of us, Mexicanos in the school. So later on, did you ever know the Carrascos?
say,
Did you know their mother?
no.
Carmen Carrasco was another liberated woman. They didn't want the Mexicans at Grant School. And she went up to the superintendent and says, my kids are here, they're gonna stay here. You can't do it. You couldn't just arbitrarily throw the kids out. So I wound up at Grant School. And then I wound up at Roosevelt, I didn't wind up at Wilson. You know, it's just the way it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because in those days, if you didn't live in the district, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know nothing about school. When they took me to school, I couldn't go home. I didn't know where I was. I'd never been in that part of town. So I wound up at Grant School. They only had 4 rooms and 6 grades. And I had the same teachers my mother had had in that same school. 20 years later, the same. In those days, the teachers didn't get married. They were all single women. And they never, once they got into teaching, they died there.
Mhm.
That was it.
And when did you start at Colton High School?
I started in 1947.
47?
Yeah,
Said 47?
47.
And you mentioned that you.
See, Colton was a 4-year high school. 9th grade was in high school.
Mhm.
And like in San Bernardino, 9th grade was a junior high.
Mhm.
But we had a 4-year high school. So consequently, being a 4-year school, we had a lot of kids, so they put us in with the big schools. Like San Bernardino, they only had 3 grades, but the biggest grade was the freshman. I think we had nothing.
Did you play any other sports?
Oh, yeah, I played baseball. The Cuates played on the same team I did. There was a gentleman from San Bernardino called Chuy Mendoza. Maybe
Yes,
you
I
remember?
remember
I
him.
played ball against him.
Yeah, first
He was
baseman.
He was a pitcher too,
Mhm.
a pitcher. And in fact, I remember Midland's Cafe had a baseball team. There was a big family of boteos. They were
Mhm.
all peloteros. All of them played ball. A great big family. They played for Midland's.
Mhm.
And that's how I got to know most of these guys through the sports.
Mhm.
But in those days, it was different than it is now. There was no trouble in the neighborhood, not like now.
Mhm.
They go to the park and behave themselves.
You know, Sammy started high school in 1947. I was born in 1947.
Ooh.
And I went to, sorry, Sam. We're like twins. But I went to Woodrow Wilson Elementary School. Mr. Harris was the principal, and my Aunt Tony was the secretary,
Uh-huh.
even back then. And I mean, I went through school all the elementary school years. I went to Colton Junior High, which is now Colton Middle School, I
Yes.
believe. They were the Falcons then. I don't think they're the
They're
Falcons.
still the Falcons.
Oh, they're still the Falcons?
Frank, are they still the Falcons? They're
Yeah.
Still the Falcons.
Still the Falcons, and I was a Colton Yellow Jacket. I graduated in 1965. I played football and baseball at the high
Now,
school.
I was gonna ask you, Sammy, you were, in 53, they had the Brown versus the Board of Education, where
I wasn't here. I was overseas.
Yeah, but that was a national
Oh, yeah.
legislation where they integrated the schools. For entertainment purposes, what did the teenagers that were in high school, Chicanos, do if they couldn't cross the railroad
They
tracks? What
still,
did you guys?
they mostly hung by themselves.
Mhm.
We had, you remember the Caldera plunge?
Yes.
That was our.
Well, I don't
place.
remember that, but
No,
I've heard about
That
it.
was ours. It was a cold water plunge, and it was cold, but that was ours, Cub plunge.
Uh-huh.
That was like a day like this, spent the day there.
Mhm.
It had the highest diving board in the valley, a 10-meter platform, at 33 feet.
Uh-huh.
And if you went off of there, you were grown up, you
Uh-huh.
were somebody. There was a guy named Chito La Rosa,
Yeah, yeah.
he would dive off of that thing, he was the best diver. And another guy, Enrique Castorena,
Yes,
They're the
my
ones
neighbor,
that-
yeah.
they're the ones that would dive off the very top.
Uh-huh.
No, we just watched.
Oh, and besides the caldera, what about dances?
They had dances there, but to this day, I don't dance, I never have. I wasn't interested.
Uh-huh,
That school used to have dances in the gym.
uh-huh.
They call them socks hops.
Yes.
Yeah, they used to have them, I went, but I'm just to pass the time.
Yeah, what about at high school? They said that they had the Mexican-American club
They did.
that had a Pan-American,
Antonieta was very prominent in that club,
uh-huh,
Antonieta. See, by the time Tony got to school, it was a little bit different. Antonieta was, no se hacía para atrás. In other words, if she thought she was right, she was right. She wouldn't back off. She
Mhm.
wouldn't. She wouldn't back off from anybody.
now who were your pals, Sammy, during the high school years?
My parents?
Your pals, your friends?
Oh, the first guy I met in school was Ruben Garcia. He sat in front of me.
Okay,
I never saw him before in my life because we didn't live there. So him and his sister were in the same class. David Gasca,
yes.
the two Ramos boys were there with me. And,
The Ramos boys, Mike or,
no, Louis and, they were related to the Gascas. They were cousins. They lived on Third Street.
Mhm.
And a kid named Bobby Aguilera was a son of the Aguileras. He moved to San Bernardino, but they went to school there.
Mhm.
They were a year ahead of me.
Mhm.
So those are the first ones I met.
What about Ernie Garcia? Was he in your class?
He didn't go to grad school.
Uh-huh.
He went to Garfield and Wilson.
No, but at high school, I'm talking about.
Oh
high
yeah,
school.
he went to high school.
Uh-huh.
He ran track. He was a cross country and a miler.
Uh-huh.
Very good.
And you said you were a baseballer.
Yeah, he wasn't. And
What
he was-
position did you play in baseball?
I played outfield.
Uh-huh.
And
And your
then
batting average was?
could never do. Couldn't-
Say 500. Nobody will remember.
No, that's the truth. But
480.
Ernie was a very good track man. And Dottie and her sister, she had a sister named Marty that was in my grade. And Dottie was a little bit older. But they were an item already in school.
Uh-huh.
They were already, Ernie and this girl were already in school.
Uh-huh.
The Anglos didn't take too good to it. They
Well,
didn't
you know,
like it.
talking about that, we mentioned 1953, and you were in the Korean conflict. How did World War II and Korea affect the life in Colton?
They took everybody.
Uh-huh.
And they were waiting for him to get out of school. See, they lowered the draft age in 1943. They lowered the draft age from 21 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
And they came out and got all the ones that were left.
Mm-hmm.
They took him right off the bat. He was barely out of high school. They took his father. His father graduated from high school at 16. They got him until he turned 18. They came and got him.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
there was nobody left. They were taken, my dad was born in 1907, and there was a guy he grew up with. They took him because they couldn't prove how old he was.
Mm-hmm.
He come from Mexico with no records, and you know, they look, oh, him.
Mm-hmm.
He was already in his 30s. My uncle was in his 30s, no family. They took him.
Mm-hmm.
He was born the same year as my dad, so he was already 35, and they drafted him.
So as long as your body temperature was 98.6, vámonos.
Yeah, they
Vámonos,
took
let's do it.
everybody.
But I was referring more to when you came back, and was there a different attitude of the people that served in the service, World War II and Korea?
See,
that I paid my dues, therefore, I need to buy a house in North Colton or have
No,
a.
what happened was, when my tour of duty was over in Korea, some of the guys that had come back already told me, wrote me a letter that says, they're opening up 29 Palms. It's terrible. He said, they're gonna send you there. He said, if you could find a way to go someplace else, go there.
Mhm.
So I stayed another year in Japan, and I didn't come back till January of '54. So when I came home by myself. I didn't come home with a group. And they flew me to San Francisco. I just came home. And some of the kids that came, went overseas together and came back together.
Mhm.
But I came home by myself.
Mhm.
I didn't wanna go to 29 pounds.
Yeah, but I was referring more of, that people that serve in the service feeling that they paid their dues, therefore you cannot treat me like a second-class citizen, and I deserve.
Yeah, my cousin Netchie, they sent him to Jacksonville, Florida, and he's on the train coming back. On the train, he went through Texas, he wanted to go in the club car. They wouldn't let him. He was in the Navy uniform,
Mhm,
Mexican, no way.
mhm,
Until they got out of Texas
Mhm.
to New Mexico.
mhm,
And it was that way. There was a place in Colton called the Hunter Sweet Shop. It was a combination drugstore, fountain and everything. Now, I don't know this for a fact. My mother told me. If you wanted service, you gotta go around the side and there was a window there. You go to the window and they will give you what you wanted and you carried it out. You couldn't go in.
mhm,
It was understood. In other words, nobody tried to go in because they knew that you couldn't go in. I mean, it was unwritten.
mhm.
But they had a window, they wouldn't deny you service, but you went on the side and they gave it to you.
And that's the way it was, and everybody accepted that.
They did accept
Everybody
it.
accepted
They
that,
accepted
yeah.
it. It was better than no ice cream.
You know, I remember my dad, I mean, I was a little kid, and, but I remember him and my mom talking about the VA. Of course, I didn't know what it was, and about veterans benefits, and about going to school, and things that he could do. I just remember the conversations. I really had no idea what they were doing, but he did take advantage of that. He went back to the Valley College, and he got his AA degree. And I remember vividly him talking about the VA loan in the very first house we moved to North Rancho, 1959. But I remember him using his VA to do that. So I know that he took advantage of those things, and he was really proud that it was service, you know, and he did take advantage of that. And I didn't get it the whole time he was doing it because I wasn't there. I was still a knucklehead kid, and but I know that those things you put on your collar, I know he had those. He had so much memorabilia from the military. You could tell that there was some pride, you know.
His father was one of the last classes at Randolph Field, I think that's what it was, for cadets for being trained for pilot training when they did away with it in 1943.
Mhm.
He was in the, he was smart. And they sent him, they transferred him to the Air Force and he didn't finish because they canceled the classes. But if it had gone any longer, he'd have probably become a pilot.
Mhm.
He was very smart, very affluent, and he had a way with people also. And he was another one that asserted himself. He didn't back down.
You know, he was a lot like my grandfather. My
He did.
grandfather could, his imagination to see something and actually build it. My dad was exactly the same way. He could imagine things and go out in the backyard and make something out of absolutely nothing. You know, even a ping pong table that he built for us just to have something to do. He built that, and it ended up being the centerpiece for the entire neighborhood for all the kids during the summer. And we would actually have tournaments there. But the rule was when my dad came home from work, there was peace. Everybody had to go. My dad wanted to sit down and relax at the dinner table. That's another thing, if I could. Dinner, very special at the house, could not speak English. He would put everything in front of him. And you had to ask for the plate, for the tenedor, servilleta, everything you had to ask for. And then if you asked you a question, it was, you better not respond with a yes or no answer. It had to be conversation in Spanish. So that's, our dinner hour was spent like that. And I remember thinking I was gonna outsmart my dad. I don't wanna do this, my thinking. So I told my dad, I'm not hungry, I'm not gonna eat. Oh, good, you can just sit there and talk with us anyway. In Spanish, he would tell me. So I did that one time, After that, I ate.
You asked me about how things were in town. There was still a lot of prejudice, especially in jobs. There was this gentleman named Rueda, Beto Rueda. the two
Yes, I
brothers.
remember Beto.
You
yes.
Beto Rueda?
Yes, I remember
Well,
Beto.
Beto Rueda worked at cement company. Beto Rueda was one of the few guys that had a car, had a 38 Ford. His brother had the identical car. They didn't buy it new, but it was a nice car. Beto Rueda went to Valley College at night to study diesel mechanics. It took him a long time. He took the test and he passed it. They promoted him to diesel mechanic. The other workers, the Gabacho says, we ain't dressing with him and we ain't working with him. The foreman says, well, your union set the rules. He passed the test, finished the top of the class. He's gonna work here. You guys can dress here, you can dress outside or shower outside. But he's staying.
What year was that, Sammy?
That was right after the war,
Uh,
right after the war.
when they were making the transition.
They just, they didn't want, you were a threat to their job, which you were. And they didn't want you there.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
didn't. You said, they said, we ain't dressing with him and we ain't working. Fine, you go do what you wanna do. But it was that way. Everybody was a laborer. Nobody,
It was hard to get
well,
promoted from labor.
they didn't assert themselves. The Mexican had at that time that attitude, I'm here, don't make any waves, we're gonna leave things as they are. But his father, Antonieta, were not that way. They were headstrong.
Mhm.
They pushed.
Sammy, you also mentioned about a person that had been worked for the city as a street sweeper.
Colunga.
Yeah, tell me about his situation.
Colunga, in fact, his
What was his
wagon,
first name?
Doroteo.
Doroteo Colunga.
In fact, they named the grandson Doroteo also.
Okay.
He was one of the first ones in Colton, and he got a job with the city, and he cleaned the streets, but he didn't have a truck. He had a wagon and a shovel, and a broom. He had worked for quite a few years, and then somebody decided, hey, he's not even a citizen. Why does he work for the city? He's gonna have to go. No, they got together and they let him keep his job. They did him a favor and let him keep working. But the wagon at the museum in Colton, his grandson's got the shovel,
Mm.
and you can see it is his shovel.
It was quite an issue. It had to go before the city council.
Yes, it did.
And the city council voted that he would keep his job.
Yes, he did.
What is the vote was 2-3,
Yeah,
3-2 or
very
something like
close.
that?
It was very
Yeah.
close.
Yeah. So that was one of the, I guess, victories that we
Yes, it was.
as Mexicans were able to, say that we got that one.
It was many, many years before we got a fireman, a Mexican fireman in Colton. In fact, there was a saying as one of the Gabachos said, you might have a mayor. Oliva was a mayor at the time.
Uh-huh.
You may have a mayor, but you'll never have a fire captain.
Yeah.
It's just the way it was.
Yeah. And that was Pascual Oliva was the mayor.
Yes, he was.
Pascual Oliva. Yeah. What year was that, Sam? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
I think that was in the sixties.
In the 60s, 62 or
Dwayne
something?
was my age, that's Pascual's son,
Uh-huh.
and I remember hanging out at their house during high school, and Pascual was the mayor
Yeah.
in the sixties.
Yeah. So.
In fact, the older brother is still alive. Angel, he's 95 or 96, he's still alive.
Yeah, I tried to get him to interview with us,
Mm.
but his grandson told me that he is not healthy enough to
No,
do
if
so.
you talk to Rudy.
Yeah.
If you want, Rudy Oliva will talk to you.
Rudy was one of our first people that
Yeah,
we interviewed.
I stopped to see him the other
Yeah,
day,
yeah.
and he told me that he says, here's an Angel, still the same Angel.
Mhm.
You know that when the father passed away, the father died before Stella was born.
Mhm.
And Agustin quit school and supported the whole brood by himself. He became the boss of the house.
And it was a large family.
He was, and Agustin was the same age as the boys, but
Mhm.
he didn't get married till he got all the boys grown up,
Mhm.
all of them.
Mhm.
Dijo mi tía, ya no hacen hombres como este hombre, pointed at Agustin, he said, ese es un hombre, which was true. Who's
Mhm.
gonna get up there? he was like 17, 18 years old, give up his whole life
Mhm.
that he had ahead of him to take care of his family.
Now, Sammy, tell me about you. We've been talking about a little bit about history, Hamel family history, a little bit about, well, before we get into that, you mentioned the first fireman in Colton. When did we get our first Mexican-American fireman in Colton?
I forget his name. What was his name? He went to college and come out and took the test. I can't
Was it Eddie
Cortez.
Cortez?
Yeah, I think it
remember
was.
Eddie Cortez.
I think it was, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
like this. But see, I was an only child for 9 years. My mother, and my brother didn't come along until 1942, so I basically spent most of my time with my grandmother. My father and mother were busy in the store, and they I got to go a lot of places where they went. I went to Los Angeles sometimes on a holiday, and my dad always had a car. He bought a brand new pickup in 1938, and I went with him when he bought it because of, with him. And then 1941, I bought a new car. Nobody had a new car, but we had one. And I remember going to Los Angeles. We'd go to the Orpheum Theater
Mhm.
to see a matinee, a stage show, and they showed a movie. In fact, at that movie, I saw a movie, the first Mexican movie I ever seen, called Maria Candelaria.
Mhm.
I saw a very, very famous Mexican movie. If you remember that? Maria Dolores del Rio was in that movie, and it was the first Mexican movie I had ever seen. I got to go to a lot of restaurants, which I'd get bored. My mother and father and uncle, they go eat. They spend all day at the restaurant. I go in the car and go to school. It was their
Now,
day out. You know?
Well, what about after the war? Where did you work after the war?
I went
After Korea.
I went to the service, and then I come back and I went to work for a phone company. That's what I did in the service. They sent me to teletype school when I went to the Marine Corps, and I got out, so I was kind of interested in it. And I made an application at Kaiser, but at Kaiser, to get a job there, you had to go there. The first day, they give you a piece of paper. Come back tomorrow, come back next week. Then the next day, they give you fill in the paper. Come back next week. Then they give you a thing, a test. Then they come back again. So in other words, you can't get hired the same day. It takes about a week of going back and forth. So people get tired. I got tired of going back and forth. So I got a job with a phone company. I stayed with them. A lot of the guys that went there for Kaiser, Pio Carrion, he was smart. He was one smart Mexican. Made him a millwright foreman after about 4 years there.
Mhm.
They sent him to Chaffey College on a crash course on blueprint reading.
¿Cómo se llamaba?
Porfirio Carrion.
Okay.
His brother.
Oh, yes.
His brother played
It's Camilo.
Camilo. That was his brother.
Well, let me change the subject a little bit. We were talking about entertainment a few minutes ago, and prior to the interview, you mentioned the part of the entertainment was baseball.
That's it.
Tell us about the baseball.
The Colton cement plant had a team,
Okay.
and there was a guy that went to school with my mother, Gordon Malzberger.
Yes.
Gordon Malzberger was CIF player of the year in 1941, I believe. And he went to play with the White Sox, and he played with Hollywood. And his son went to school. I remember.
Well, his son was in my class.
Okay,
Yeah, Billy.
yeah. He
Yeah.
looked just like his father, glasses and the whole
Yeah.
thing. But the cement plant had a team. Santa Fe had a team.
Mhm.
And they had this black guy, big, tall, skinny black guy. His last name was Morris. They nicknamed him Santa Fe Morris.
Mhm.
And he pitched for years. I mean, he must have been 60 years old. He still played. And there was a lot of commercial teams. Redlands had a team. And on Sundays, that was it. Everybody go to the ball game.
Mhm.
It was cheap, didn't cost anything.
What about Colton? Did they have their team?
Colton had the Mercuries. They came in after the war.
Uh-huh.
They came after the war. Albert Martinez, which is Nick's brother, Willie Rueda, Ralph Martinez. Remember Ralph Martinez?
Ralph and his
Ralph
brother.
And his brother.
Uh-huh.
And Teo Duarte.
Teo Duarte.
One of the Rosales.
Beto.
Gilberto. And Mercado, Mike Mercado.
Mike Mercado.
Juan
The
Mercado.
Abril brothers
Yeah.
played for
Pardon?
the Abril brothers.
Yeah, but they were
Brothers.
later on. And
Yeah, they
then
were later.
Tony Garcia.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Garcia, he played. He was a very good player.
And Tony lived almost across the street from your store.
Yeah, he lived up
Yeah.
the street.
Yeah.
Chamano was his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Chamano, his real name was David.
Mm-hmm.
They era David, Gayo, Tala y Cherry, las muchachas. Y el padre era Ross Garcia.
Mm-hmm.
He was a carpenter.
Yeah. So baseball was big in Colton.
It was.
Mhm.
It was a big thing.
What
And
about the
then
Purdue teams? You mentioned Meatless.
Meatloaf had a good team. I mean, the Botellos was a big family. We all played. They played at the park. It's up in north of Mount Vernon. There's a park up there. That's where they played at.
Was it the corner of Mount Vernon and 7th Street? Where the
Farther
Placita
up,
is now?
farther up.
Yeah.
But they had a very good, then a prop room had a team, and then there was a softball team called the Generals, they had a team. It was a big thing, it was sponsored by local, and then there was a team in Blooming called the Cedar Lumber Company,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a very good team that,
Mhm.
they all played each other,
Mm-hmm.
but it was.
It was a Sunday entertainment. Eh?
Sunday entertainment.
Family
Sunday
entertainment.
Yeah. And you mentioned you worked for the telephone company, and you retired from the telephone company?
I started with General, then I went to Victorville, it became Interstate, and then that company changed to Contel, then they changed to Verizon, and I wound up with General again.
Mm.
All the big companies eat the little ones, that's the way it
Yeah.
is now,
Yeah.
that's the way business is now.
Yeah,
And pretty soon there won't be no telephone company because of the cell phone.
yeah.
That's what I tell people, if you see a telephone, better take a picture of it, because it's gonna be gone.
Well, people don't remember the rotary forms that we used to
That's
have.
what I told the kids the other day. You see that thing, you put your finger in the hole and you dial. Really?
Well, what about, did you have family?
I had my first wife. In fact, one of them looked just like my mother in the picture that she has.
No.
She's a fitting image of my mother.
Uh-huh.
And they just, I don't know what it is. Because like I told you, my family is split in two halves. They are Ramirez, which was the first group,
Uh-huh.
and the last three are Gonzalez.
Uh-huh.
And we're very different.
Uh-huh.
His side, his father,
Okay.
that is my girl. That's Pete. He hasn't changed, lo mismo. And that's Amelia.
Frank, we're gonna have to scan these, eh? And then put him as part of into the
See-
interview.
See, to tell you how things were in those days. My grandmother had kids from 1897 to 1920. It's a long time.
20-some years?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, when Pete was born, my grandmother was already in her 40s. She couldn't breastfeed Pete.
Mm.
Pete was an infant. His older sister breastfed Nick, Baker, and him,
Mm.
because that's the way things were done.
Mhm.
That's the way things were done. And my grandmother, she was already in her 40s.
Yeah. So, Sammy, what are you doing now?
Nothing. I lost my wife almost 3 years ago, Parkinson's.
Uh-huh.
I live by myself.
Where do you live?
I live in Just Ransom in Victorville.
Ah,
It's
okay.
a gated community. We had a nice house before. It got too big. We couldn't take care of it. So all I do is pay the rent, pay the lease, and they do everything. They mow the lawn. I don't do anything. I just get up, eat. It's-
Well, I'm delighted that you were able to do that because
In fact-
we lucked out with you today.
In fact, you know what I got? When I was taking care of my mother, my dad had just bought a Honda, 93 Honda. Guess where it's at? I got it. 93 at 21 years old. I'm still driving it.
You know, your mom was a very good friend of my mom's.
Oh,
And you said you took care of your mom. How long did you take care of your mom?
all told, she was on dialysis for about 5 years, last 5 years of her life. And I used to live in Victorville, and I would come down Monday morning, and I would take her to a session on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then on Friday night, Estelita, my cousin, would come and spend the weekend with my mother and look after her. And then I would come back the following Monday and stay the week. So
Yeah.
that's what I did.
Yeah. And you know, Fernando, you mentioned very Sundays after church, and your mom was very involved with the
Yeah,
church.
she was. That's a thing that used to make me mad. I'd come back on Monday and I'd go in the garage to get the car, and the mirror was crooked and the seat was all the way forward. I said, "You have been driving?" "Oh, I only went to church with the ladies, and the only one's got a driver's license now." "I don't want you driving
That's
anymore."
true. That's true. She was a taxi for all of them.
Yeah, and the seat was all the way forward and the mirror's crooked. I says, "I know you've been driving." So
No se caso, ¿verdad?
her
Sammy?
license ran out, expired, you know. She says, oh, my license is expired. He says, I don't know if they're gonna give me one.
Yeah. It's too
So
bad
I go
because,
visit her, and she comes out the kitchen door, and she's waving it in her hand, she's got it. 3 more years. Oh.
ay. But anyway, that was a good group of ladies that got together and did their thing. Not only for the church, but they got
It
together, had
was.
lunch, yeah. Fernando, what about you and your family?
My own children?
Yeah.
Well, I'm on my second marriage. I had Julie, Jennifer, and Victor. And then my wife now, she's got 3 kids, so we're all pretty close. We have 6 kids collectively. And pretty much it's the family unit that I thought that we could have that took a long time to actually put together by just getting together. And
But you're
getting
retired also. You
I'm retired, but I
from
still teach.
Several places.
I'm retired from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I retired in 2002.
And you were president of the,
I retired as a president of the local union. I retired from here, Cal State, where I worked maintenance in the electrical department for Fred Roybal, and Fred was my boss. And I'm still teaching. This is my last year. I'm teaching for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers for their apprenticeship program.
uh-huh.
I've been doing this, I've been involved in the electrical industry since I graduated from the Valley College. Went to work for Electrical Wholesale House, Southern California Edison, and then I went to work in construction, which is something that suited me best. I had a great job with Edison, but it wasn't what I wanted. And then when I got into construction, it's something I could do, you know, with my hands and use my brain at the same time and take on those responsibilities of building like the Union Hall. I was the general foreman when we built the Union Hall right on this campus here.
Mhm.
So it was a pleasure to take on those responsibilities and a pleasure to become the president, you know, eventually.
How many members did you have?
About 900, right? Currently it's about 1,000. And the irony of this whole thing, my son is now the president.
Your son is now the president
He's
of
now
the
the
Brotherhood?
current-
Nepotism, huh?
Es lo que es. It was a fixed.
No, he worked for it. I never wanted him to do that. I wanted him to go to college because he had the brains, but he also had the mechanical aptitude that my grandfather, my dad, myself, I mean, we all got that ability, and he's really got it. So he got into the trade. He excelled at it very fast and got involved and just took a leadership role, and then he finds himself as the current president. Right now, he's still a little bit overwhelmed because he's only 34 years old, so he's got to grow into it a little
Well,
bit.
it's a good thing father is around.
We talk a lot.
Yes.
We talk a lot.
You know what he's saying about being smart. You remember Ray Avril?
Yes.
You know, Ray Avril, when he married Nellie, Nellie had gone to college in San Bernardino.
Uh-huh.
She had been to college. Ray Avril couldn't read or write when he married her. She taught him.
Hmm.
Ray Avril
Where was
remodeled.
Nellie from?
Pardon?
Sam, where was she from?
San Bernardino.
San Bernardino.
Ray Avril was he worked at PFE, he was a very good carpenter, and he remodeled more houses for Anglos in North Colton than anybody else. He was good, but he was self-taught. It's like everybody else, self-taught. He didn't go to apprentice school. He learned it on the job training.
Yeah.
He was a super carpenter. I mean, a finished carpenter. You know, one thing to put up a board, but to do cabinet work and stuff is stuff that you're either born with it or you're not.
You know, one thing, if I could, you know, about my dad, that when we would have those conversations, you know, he'd have a conversation with my sister that was intended for her, and conversations with the boys intended for us. But what he would tell us is that when you get in that working market, certain things you have to be looking at. Don't just get a job. Get a job that has a future, because one day you will retire. So you have to be thinking about that. And the one thing that the word that he mentioned that I never got for years was collective bargaining. He says, you need to go work somewhere where they have collective bargaining, where they're gonna take care of you, where they're gonna, represent you and do things in collective bargaining. Okay, the next day I forget. And I would go from job to job as a little kid, or, right out of high school. And it wasn't until I went to work for Southern California Edison that I realized, collective bargaining. So I've been a member of the IBEW, God, I think since 1972, which is a long time. And it's now that's what I tell my kids. That's why my entire family is a member of Local 477. All my son-in-laws. God, we're all in this. There's a lot of us now in this trade. And I tell them all about the same story about the collective bargaining. Come on, collective bargaining.
Well,
Same
Fernando,
message.
you touched on something that I didn't have on my notes, but was your grandfather, did he belong to Los Trabajadores Unidos, or did he belong to
He had to,
the
cement
the
plant.
union?
At the cement plant, yes. I believe they were organized under some collective bargaining agreement. I don't know what it was, but yes, he was a union member there.
He was a union
Yes.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
and my mom and dad both were.
Okay.
So, but I didn't understand the message for years about the, how when you're young, it goes in one ear and out the
Yeah.
other one. I was one of those guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I do get it now, and I'm preaching that message to my children and grandchildren. I even have grandchildren in this trade now,
Yeah.
so they're all doing well.
We don't realize the hardships like my father and his grandfather went through to come, my father told me, to come to a strange country, not knowing the language, not knowing anybody, and not having anything, and making it.
Yeah, another irony in the story, I mentioned that my grandfather and my Tio Steve, it's 2 generations apart, but they were both from Aguascalientes. Both came to Colton and married sisters.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Go figure.
Well, talking about your story, what else do you have over on the side?
Well, this is a book that was, it's called Recollection and Reflections, Volume 3, South Colton. And it's a photographic essay. A lot of our family is in this book. There's a ton of pictures in here. The copyright date is 2001. I don't know where you can get a copy of this. Every time I take it to a family gathering, everybody wants to steal it. And I keep a close eye on it. I don't mind sharing it with the familia, because there's stuff in here they need to know.
Right.
I have included a lot of pictures, like, for example, that picture right there, in here just to mark where the family is located throughout the book. So there's a ton of history going, God, way back. I don't even know, I don't have the dates for some of these.
Yeah. So it's a collection that was done by whom?
I'm gonna read you the names here. I have them right here. Okay, by Joe Lucero, Rudy Oliva, Frank Sanchez, Rodolfo Serrano, and Bobby Vasquez.
Okay, and they were all 7th Street guys.
Yeah.
I
Like
believe
I see
so.
it, they were
I
not-
believe so.
They're
In
all
fact,
calles
Joe
siete.
Lucero was a musician that played with Nick. He's a trumpet, a sax.
Yeah, and Bobby
He plays-
Vasquez was a musician also.
And then Rudy went on to, he went to college. He became,
Well, he retired as
Yeah,
professor.
Yeah, he was up in
Professor is Fresno,
Tehachapi.
from Fresno.
Yeah, but he was living in Tehachapi, I believe.
Yeah. I call him regularly and tell him what I'm doing. And he says, pick on them, Tom, pick on them.
No, I got involved with this, just in our own family through my Aunt Tony. I didn't know that my Aunt Tony had all these memories in her head about La Familia, and then I was so intrigued with the stories that I couldn't get enough of it. And then when we were doing hospice for her, I went over one day and she was writing on the back of the pictures who was in the picture. So I started to write for her, and she had a mountain of pictures. And we would do like maybe 10 or 15 because every picture had a story. And they were amazing.
So what are you doing with that collection now, Fernando?
I have it on a, I'm not a computer guy, but it's called a flash drive.
Mhm.
I got it even, so I can remind myself
Mhm.
that you gotta plug it in. And I have some on my laptop. I have a ton of these from the Rochin family, my tio Menyo, all the way back. I mean, we go back to my grandma Nina. That's my grandma Nina right there. Her mother was Mama Pilar.
She's the one responsible for the whole thing.
Yeah, Mama Pilar in Indio. That was the Morales family in Indio, and before that, there were the Lara family in right outside Chihuahua, Mexico, in El Rancho Lareño. They were the Lara family back then. And my Mama Pilar, my great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother,
I got the Nopi like.
married Pedro Lara. And Pedro Lara's, let's see, Pedro Lara's father had a brother whose son was Jerónimo, the Indian.
Geronimo.
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 Yep.
Yeah, you're kidding.
No, that's why, a lot of times for our family reunion, I have it right here somewhere. For our family reunion,
I still got my shirt.
we'll,
I'll be
yeah,
damned.
we'll put this as the cover letter on the invitation, okay? And everybody always asks about that, but I have in here I have the family tree going back to that time. So there's all these pictures. There's a ton of stuff in here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just our family that I share with my kids. My kids will one day inherit all this that I have. I mean, somebody's got to get it,
Yeah.
pass on the
When
stories.
we have our family gathering, remember, who made that sheet of plywood with the picture?
Oh, it's not, yeah, it's on some plywood, but it's on stainless steel, and we got together and we decided we need to do a pictorial of the family tree with all the faces associated with the names I have on this thing here. And so we started doing that, and it is huge. This thing, it takes several people to assemble it at the reunion, and then all the photographs are there of the different families just branching out. It is so big now that we've outgrown the tree, and we can't figure out how are we gonna make this thing bigger? How are we gonna get this thing there in the first place?
And the little arrow pointing to somebody had written on there, she was responsible.
Yeah, Mama Pilar, she's at the very bottom, and Pedro, yeah. And, it's branched out into something that's unbelievable, it's huge. And there's no more room. We've run out of room, because the next generation, my grandkids and great-grandkids, now I have 4 great-grandkids, there's no room for them at the top, so we're trying to figure out what
So
we're
you have
gonna
to start
do.
an orchard.
Yeah,
The
something.
family tree going to a big orchard.
Yeah, an orchard, that's a great idea,
Annex to it.
with several trees in it, I like that. Everybody bring their own tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fernando, you wrote a wonderful little description of the family. Can you just, maybe not read, or you can read it, but can you share the points that you put on your narrative?
Well, I got together, originally this started because in Colton they wanted to do a book, which never got published, by the way, on historical locations in South Colton. So my dad told me about it. He knows I like to just dabble in writing a little bit. So he says, you know what, we got to get together and put something together about the store. So we got together with Mariana, my mom, my dad, Antonieta, and several different times in 1995. And I think Sammy was involved in some of the conversations. A lot of different people got involved. And it's like anything else. You start talking about La Esperanza Market, and the stories, I mean, just get like the family tree. The stories just take off, and all of a sudden, like what I figured maybe a 2-hour sit down, the sun has already gone down, and I'm trying to organize my notes. That was the beauty of it, sitting there with the family, doing that. Well, it was about the historical landmark, and I thought, God, La Esperanza Market, man, all the people that were involved, even the Santa Fe Railroad was part of the history because they stopped there before the underpass, the N Street underpass. The train would stop there before it pulled into the yard, the Santa Fe yards in San Bernardino. And the engineers would get off, and my tío Steve would make them, it was like Subway before Subway. He would make them, I mean, whatever they wanted, a sandwichito, he would call it.
Cold cuts.
Yeah, sandwichito, and heat the soda, and they'd sit there and they'd have a conversation. My tío Steve knew everybody by name. Well, one of the guys, and I mentioned his name in the story, he started to like Trini Leiva. Trini Leiva worked for my tío Steve and my Aunt Marion. They eventually got married in the 1960s. You know, just kind of tie in the railroad to the store too. I mean, everybody was a part of that market. Everybody was made to feel special there. And you know, it's a landmark, right in the preface here. It's a landmark only in the imaginations of all the people that had an opportunity to visit the store and experience, I call it that La Esperanza experience, because there's nothing like it. You can't go anywhere now and experience that. Nowhere. It was special.
And you put it down on paper, and I'm delighted that you shared it with me, and also gave us a little summary of what your feelings were that you put on that little story that you put together.
Yeah, it's a story that I've shared with all my kids. They all have a copy of this. I love to write. I write every morning, and they're the recipients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Could we borrow it and put it in our
This,
discussion today?
absolutely. I think you guys have a copy already. I gave you guys a copy. This is my original one here. I don't have any more at home. I've given them all away.
Right.
But this one, yeah, you can make copies of this.
Okay.
If I can get it back.
Well, you
Or
know,
copies of anything, really.
I don't know how long we've taken for this interview, Sammy and Fernando, but it was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it, eh? And thank you very much, both of you, Sammy
You
and
know, the
Fernando.
good thing is, I can remember things that happened a long time ago. I can't remember what I did yesterday. It's true.
we're the same
I
boat.
can remember my teacher, first day of school, Mrs. Peltz.
Yeah.
And I can't remember like yesterday. Oh, what did I do yesterday?
And you know, really the time is insignificant, you know, it's just a pleasure to sit here with all of you and share these stories. And thank you for asking the questions and inviting us here. I mean, this has been a pleasure for us. And I asked Sammy, I said, hey, Sam, I'm going to go to the Cal State San Bernardino. Do you know Tom Rivera, Dr. Tom Rivera? Yeah. He says, he wants to do an interview. Do you want to go with me? He goes, yeah, when, what time? And so here we are, and it's been good for us. Sammy and I have a special relationship. Obviously, we grew up kind of like my grandfather and my tío Steve, two different generations, but we're pretty close now.
Do you remember the Visconti family?
Visconti, ¿dónde vivían? Where they live?
They lived over there off of the Cinco, off of Fifth Street. La señora Visconti was very active in the church, her husband. Her son Lawrence was a pilot, Second World War, got killed in France. He was the first known Mexican to go to college. His sister, Virginia,
From Colton?
from Colton. His sister graduated from the university also. Nobody went. They're
What was
lucky
that-
they got to high school.
What was the last name?
Visconti.
With a V or
Dave
a B?
Visconti was the youngest brother.
Okay.
He had a brother named Arturo. But I remember I had the mumps and I was homesick, and they came to visit me. This right before he went into service, and he became a pilot and he got killed. But
And he was one of the first people from Colton, Mexican American,
to go to
to
college.
go to college. Ah,
Visconti.
Visconti, I have to look him up.
Yeah, David. His name was Lorenzo.
Lorenzo
Lorenzo
Visconti.
Visconti.
Yeah.
And he just, in those days, especially the women, they're lucky they got to junior high school. It was unknown for the women to
Mhm.
it was old way of thinking. What do you need school for? You gotta get married anyway.
Mm.
But, he
So it was different mentality, yes, Sammy.
well, that's the way it was.
You had to grow up and go to work.
exactly right.
Yeah, go up and grow to work and maintain the family.
Because you had to help. I mean,
Yeah.
the family needed all the help they could have, but they toughed it out and went to university. But I worked with his nephew in Victorville.
Mhm.
He told me that later on, when the war ended, some French people contacted him and they had found him and they had wrapped up all his belongings in a silk scarf and kept it and sent it to him.
Now, you have a picture here.
Oh,
That's my grandfather,
Yeah.
Don Vito.
Oh, wonderful.
He's the one that built the
He's
store.
dressed formally here.
Yeah, he does look good.
He's got his
Pechera.
formal dress.
Can we borrow and scan it?
Yes, that's why I
Okay,
pulled it
now,
out.
and I'll give it to you, back to you.
That's one of the buildings that he built in the back of the property.
He built everything that's there.
Everything.
He built
Yeah.
everything.
And can you put his name on the back?
It's got his
It's
name.
got- It's
Oh,
on the
great,
back.
thank you, thank you. Now, Fernando and Sam, anything else that I forgot to ask or that you can recall that we can take advantage of the time that we have here?
Except that we lived in very close proximity to all of us. His father lived backyard to backyard. They lived in that back part, so I could look out and see him. His uncle, his father's brother, lived next door to us. My grandmother lived across the street. The other aunt lived across the alley. The next sister lived in the next house. And we all lived right there. There was never a shortage of kids to play with. We had a lot of kids to play with.
Well, you know, South Colton is 1.3 square miles.
Really?
Yeah, from Third Street all the way to 12th Street, and then from, is it L Street all the way to Congress. So it was a short 1.3 square miles of territory.
You know, just to jump on what Sammy said about living so close together, that's what I remember. And a comment just came to mind, that it takes a village. I think it was Hillary Clinton, or it might have been somebody else, I don't know. But that's what we had back there in those days, because everybody was your mom. Your tios were your mom, and your tios, you know, were all watching you. And, you know, and I told Sammy this story on the way here. We lived right next to the railroad tracks. I was at my grandma's house, and I used to love the trains. And then the train would start moving, so I'd run up the hill, and I'd climb on the ladder on the side of the boxcar, and I'd hold on with one foot like I was really brave. I was about 8 years old. And I'd ride the boxcar just a few blocks down and then jump off. Well, one of these days, I'm holding on to the ladder on the boxcar, and the train's traveling, and my Aunt Marion was the first car parked right there before the underpass. So by the time I got back to my grandma's house, my dad was already there, you know, she told on me. But I guess that's part of growing up in that neighborhood. They all watched us,
You
which was
couldn't
really
go
good.
anywhere in Colton without stopping for a train. No matter which direction you went, there was no grade crossing. They were all flags. No matter where you went, the direction you went, there was a train going by.
Yeah, those were good times. Familia was, I mean, there was an abundance of family. In front, to the left, to the right, it didn't matter. It was always family, kids playing. There was a ton of kids everywhere.
Like I told him before, he says, nobody had a watch. A certain train would go by, they knew what time it was. The Santa Fe
Yeah.
blew the whistle, they knew what that time it was.
5 o'clock.
The church rang the bell, they knew what time it was. That was it. Todo estaba conocido by, the cement company blew the whistle, it was 3 o'clock.
Yeah, young kids nowadays don't have that experience or that kind of freedom that we did back in those days. Right now, if my grandson rode his bicycle to Fairmount Park like I did, you know, the parents would go crazy. I would ride my bike to Fairmount Park and just come home. I'd be by myself, and I'd tell my brother, and oh yeah, it was no big deal, you know. But it is now.
The river was a playground. We call it a river.
Oh, the Santa Ana River.
Yeah.
That was a playground.
That was a playground.
You go down there, I don't know how we went down there, but we went down there and run around. Sometimes a little bit of trickle of water, but not too much. And then we used to go to the Sequia up on top of Jap Hill
Yes,
and go swimming in it. It
Yes.
was open at the time.
right.
That was a hangout.
Yeah.
That was entertainment.
So we made do with the river, La Sequia, La Pilita,
That's right.
and everything
Los
else.
Cuninos.
Los
Yes,
Cuninos,
Cuninos,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, listen, again, thank you so
Oh,
much
Thank you for
for
having
being
me.
with us this morning. And we, we thoroughly had a wonderful, we reminisced quite a bit about the early Colton, about family, and also some of the values that we got as we were growing up in Colton as young kids. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
You know, I've talked to other people from like San Bernardino, they lived in the neighborhood, and basically they were in the same boat we were. They did the same thing we did on Mount Vernon. And it was no different. Different town, but they did the same thing.
Yes, yes. And again, because, we were not permitted to do other things outside our little territory.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And we didn't wanna go anywhere else.
And we had to make do with what we had. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, guys. That was good.